get up and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my real top niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose a big holes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money brought your great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa. Thanks, baby, you made me $1 billion. Plus, I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are back. It's been only 1 week, but for some reason it seems different. I don't know. But this is Voice of Rebellion Radio, UCY Radio. And wait a minute. I think my co-host Al Schwartz is calling in, and I'm... Okay, we're live. Sorry for the technical difficulties. This is UCY Radio, Voice of Rebellion Radio. I have my co-host Al Schwartz here. Today's an important show, and I'm sorry we had about a minute of dead air there while we were reconnecting. We were talking about Ukraine today, and we're talking about the fight that's going on between fascist West Ukrainians and the East Ukrainian rebels that style themselves, they call them Novorussia. Russia is the name of the group. That the unified country that's proposed state that's going to be between the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republic that have already formed and declared independence almost a year, I think over a year ago, from West Ukraine. Crimea was recently annexed by Russia by 96% popular vote. Now they have very high polling numbers in the Lugansk and Donetsk republics, but no official polls being allowed by West Ukraine, and East Ukrainians took up arms because these West Ukrainians were that were sponsored by the United States government, brought to power by the United States government, funded by the United States government the whole time. I think we dropped off again. What's causing the problems?
I have no
Internet
idea.
connection or something?
I could hear you fine. Everything was working good, and then it just dropped off on its own.
Well, anyways, we're back again. But I was talking about what exactly is going on, and so the West, what got to this point, the East Ukrainians during the protest, they started protesting in multiple cities, including Donbass and Donetsk. Donbass is in the central eastern part. It's almost in the dead center of the country. It's in the southeast part of the country, technically by regions, and Donetsk is on the more towards. It's in the eastern part of Ukraine. If also put a little bit of a perspective, Kiev is, sort of in West Ukraine, and so it's like the terms West Ukraine,
Central,
and East Ukraine are not really exactly the best terms to describe the situation. But Kiev
it's
is
in the center, pretty much.
the center of the
Yeah.
country, and then they have Crimea is also in the south center part of the country, and then you have parts in the south center.
Is your tablet fully charged, Chris? Because
Again, we had it drop.
I'm asking if your tablet's fully charged, because there's problems hearing you. You keep cutting off.
What?
I said, is your tablet fully charged, because you keep cutting off?
No, I'm half. It's about halfway charged.
Okay.
The internet, if anything, but I think we've been on air. It keeps cutting off. Hopefully, this brings to a stop. It's one of
Yeah,
our.
I can hear you much better now. And you were describing where the Crimea is. It's separate from the Ukrainian mainland. It's south in the Black Sea. It borders Russia.
It's a peninsula in the south center region of the country.
Right. It's not an island, but it's like connected to the
peninsula. It's only connected by the north to the rest of mainland Ukraine. So it's it's almost like its own section. And historically, it's not part of Ukraine. And that's what's funny about the West Ukrainians complaining about the annexation, is that it wasn't until Nikita Khrushchev gave it to the Ukrainian SSR in the 1950s. It was always part of the Russian SSR, and before that, the Russian Empire. It always had been a Russian territory, and only for the last 60 years or so has it been Ukrainian. And now, it's going.
Yeah, Khrushchev's parents were Ukrainian, and he wanted Crimea, which had always been Russia, to be part of Ukraine. But that was against the wishes of the people, which was affirmed in the internationally supervised referendum, where 96% voted to rejoin Russia after the Russophobic and fascist government took over in Kiev by U.S. EU-backed coup. Recently, Ray McGovern, who is a CIA whistleblower who I met in New York, was talking on Russia Today and comparing the false evidence provided on the Iraq War with the fabrications in Ukraine, including with the flight that we're going to talk about, the report that came out. But it was about Ukraine, and he sent a letter to Angela Merkel, and he's saying that German intelligence depends too much on false U.S. intelligence when it comes to Ukraine. So it's interesting, the European perspective on that. The French, Hollande's government is more reluctant. It's more for a peace like they came to agree in Belarus and Minsk. They're more reluctant to back escalations in Novorossiya or eastern Ukraine. Uh, but the Germans are still a very pro-American stance of being against eastern Ukraine and forcing them to be part of the Ukrainian country that's part of the fascist government that took over. But there's some there's different positions in Europe on that. Greece, for example, is all like France and is reluctant, or there's even better relations with Russia, with Putin, and Western Europe in particular is very dependent on Russian oil, and they've been subservient to U.S. interests, the EU, at a great expense, and I think the people are pressuring their governments now to back off on that through revelations, through what Snowden showed or whatnot. So that's put pressure out there.
And and it's ironic. Some of West Ukraine's biggest sponsors are one is Germany. That you'd think that the German people would be in uproar that their government is supporting a fascist government after everything that happened during the Third Reich. And this is what Kiev is doing, and the people that help out Kiev. Not just the Ukrainian military, but also who they pretty much subcontract out some of their more dirty deeds to. These people are doing crimes that ideologically are very similar and very appallingly, parallel to what happened in Nazi Germany and what Nazi Germany did to surrounding countries. And targeting of ethnic Russians, just like the Nazis targeted ethnic Slavs or Jews. And the West Ukraine, they used to be the party that one of the main parties that took over. There's two, Right Sector and Svoboda, that took over. Both are fascistic. The Svoboda party, I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but anyways, they were openly anti-Jewish a few years ago. However, that policy was reformed as the EU got more involvement in the ideology of the party, and now they're actually funded by Israel, the West Ukrainian government. And in fact, they received a missile shipment that will, when we're talking about the flight later, will come into play. That were put on the Ukrainian fighter jets from Israel. And
well, I don't think Israel was directly involved, but certainly there was a missile that was manufactured in Israel that they say was in the report, in the conclusive report of what caused the downing of the plane. But I think all links go to Western Ukraine, and whether they received or purchased Israeli missiles, that has to be investigated.
Well, it's again, that needs to be put out in the open that these that Israel, just like in the old, again, if you look up the transfer agreement where the Nazis sent Jews to rich Jewish people to conquer Palestine, it's realized Zionism and Nazism actually have a history together, and it's not surprising that they continue to have a connection to this day, as we see with the West Ukrainian-Israel connection, where Israel is one of West Ukraine's strongest allies, right up there with Germany and the United States. The United States is practically directly responsible for the current Maidan government's creation, which, remember, before Yankovic, now he was not perfect as Prime Minister of Ukraine, but he was pro-Russian, and that infuriated, infuriated the EU, infuriated the United States, and that's why they did a coup against them. And then they did an opportunistic thing and made a thing that would be constantly a problem that Russia would have to deal with. As long as its Maidan government's there, it's going to be a hassle because it's this country that's right by their borders. That's pretty largely, it's pretty large sized, and that they're going to be, and it's going to be. It looks like the Kiev's mission, as even though they can't complete it, is to, is to tear down Moscow. It seems to be Kiev's. Kiev. Actually, some of these people have actually said statements like they think that they could actually beat Russia in war. The West Ukrainian military, they actually believe that, these people are commanded. But it shows the extreme hatred that they have towards the Russians. And a country that has, out of the ex-Soviet republics, it's won the most Russian, was by the ethnicity. In fact, Crimea is 65% ethnic Russian. That's why they all voted to leave, because they're being persecuted. It's not just that they're no. It's not like what people think, that they're no longer receiving special privilege, so they want to leave. No, it's that they went from being treated as equals to now being treated as second-class citizens, and they're being killed. They're being, like what happened at Odessa, another south. It's actually not that far from Donbass, southeast. Yes, it's in the southeastern region, where 30 to 40 West Ukrainians are killed, or not East Ukrainians, are killed by West Ukrainian thugs, including pregnant women and children, in a building while they're burnt alive.
In Odessa, you're talking about Odessa, and Odessa is still under control of Western Ukraine. But most of the people there are ethnically Russian, just as they are in Novorossiysk.
Geographically, it's in southeast
Ukraine. It's in southern Ukraine, but Novorossiysk does not include Odessa, unfortunately. They include Donetsk and Donetsk, which both border Russia.
That they want to liberate is Odessa and the southeast Ukraine, pretty much anything east of Donbass, where Odessa's east of Donbass, I believe. Just it's not that far. And
I'm pretty sure Odessa's west of Donbass. It's in the south in the Black Sea.
It's right on the. Mostly like around the center region. What I'm saying is that Novorossiysk wants to.
I think Donbass is the province where Donetsk is, so that has to be east of Odessa. But Odessa is certainly in the south, and everybody knows in the south of Ukraine is mostly ethnic Russians, just as in most of eastern Ukraine is ethnic Russians. The entire country of Ukraine, when it had Crimea included, was about 50% Russian. About half the country still, maybe a little less, is Russian right now. So, or at least, their grandparents or their heritage can be found in Russia. So there are Russian soldiers who volunteered on their own to join brigades along with Novorossiysk, which I think is their right. And they've had some probably financial and military support of the resistance in Novorossiysk. But are there Russian tanks or Russian invasion of Ukraine, which they could easily take over? No. Because Putin understands the political repercussions of doing something like that. So there are false images, false claims, and false evidence that Russian tanks are coming in when they're not. Just like when Colin Powell went before the UN with false, satellite images of, transporting weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that didn't actually happen. So it's not the first time the United States has lied to the world. Europe cannot continue to be so stupid as to go along with Washington's orders against its own interests and the interests of its people, in particular in its position on Ukraine. And I think Minsk gave some hope for peace, the Minsk agreement, but it needs to be implemented by people on the ground. If it's not, then the civil war in Ukraine and Novorossiysk will continue.
Well, the Minsk agreement, the West Ukraine violated it almost immediately. West Ukraine has broken the ceasefire many times when there was ceasefires called between the East Ukrainian forces and West Ukraine, and they continue to do shellings into the East Ukrainian. They have the East Ukrainian area where they actually were supposed to. West Ukraine was, I think, as part of one of the agreements, was supposed to grant them not independence, but to be an anonymous region, which is slight independence. I think that what really the East Ukrainian fighters cannot stop until there's full independence in at least East Ukraine, and they should be, the West Ukrainian citizens need to rise up, because I know they're not that popular there with the people.
Well, even Poroshenko has been threatened by right sector. They said if Poroshenko is going to implement anything for Minsk, that they'll do a coup against him. So Poroshenko's weak, and he's a capitalist, he's not a fascist, but he's weak and he's afraid of the fascists. These same fascists that were condemned by the EU a couple years ago for anti-Semitism, who are now keeping their anti-Semitic sentiments secret, but we know that they're still Nazi in their thinking. And Poroshenko himself is limited in what he can do because he's being held hostage, basically, by these far-right groups that have infiltrated his military.
Well, I think by not calling Poroshenko a fascist is a little bit of an insult to the people who have to live under his reign. He is a fascist. He's just not as brutal as maybe right sector or some of these other people that are. But you also have to remember some of these right sector people are in his government. It's just it's more like the more radical versions of right sector that are on the streets, want to do a coup if Poroshenko doesn't go completely with the party line that's already been set for
The former president of Ukraine worked alongside Poroshenko in the government. Poroshenko's from Odessa, so he does business with Russians all the time. He was in the negotiation in Minsk. To compare him to right sector, I mean, he's owns chocolate factories. He's a capitalist, which isn't.
Well, that's actually how.
That doesn't mean that he's good either.
That he's an oligarch.
I've seen no evidence that he was ever, fascist himself. But certainly now he's working all of a sudden as an opportunist with fascists to maintain power. But before that, he was working alongside a pro-Russian president.
Well, it's Poroshenko. The truth about him is that he still ordered his army to do ethnic killings in East Ukraine. So he's actually has very and he's an oligarch himself. Yeah. Another characteristic of a fascist government where the government's controlled by oligarchs, much like
the Nazis came to power by election, and then one of the first things Hitler did was prevent himself from being reelected because he knew what he was going to do was piss off a lot of Germans. So he made himself totalitarian power. But the difference is Poroshenko was never elected. As a matter of fact, they took over in coup, and then large swaths of Ukraine did not take part in the elections. Because by the time the elections came that confirmed Poroshenko, who had been in power a few months, Novorossiya had already declared independence. As a matter of fact, Novorossiya in a referendum did the same thing as Crimea and asked Russia to take them into their territory, and Putin didn't find it prudent to do that, but he is supporting the resistance there, understandably.
Well, there was nothing democratic about how the Maidan government came to power. It was via a coup. They said that was via demonstrations on the streets and that they eventually overthrew.
We got a caller. Hold on. We got a caller. You have a question about Ukraine?
Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, you have a question about Ukraine, or would you like to talk about something that you've learned about?
Well, I've been listening to your show, and you guys are just talking about Nazis, and
yes.
Okay, you're saying Nazis are in Ukraine and all that, but the thing is, check this out. Back in the day, Germans didn't call themselves Nazis. They were Germans or German. The word Nazi was brought up in Hollywood, and it's just a Jewish narrative that you guys are following to this day.
Well,
and I really don't understand that.
National Socialists is what they call themselves. That's correct. But they were called in the newspapers and maybe in Hollywood, I don't know, Nazis for short. And yeah, a lot of them rejected that label.
Well,
but we're talking about Ukraine
Nazi
in regards
is
to the collaborators.
The term from the Ashkenazi Jews.
Well, yeah, coincidentally, if somebody's
that's what they were called.
Or an Ashkenazi,
but that's what they were called. And people in you guys are saying that the people in the Ukraine are calling somebody else Nazis, but that's just a Jew narrative.
Well, let me give you an example.
You need to lose that.
I'm going to tell you the link to Ukraine. I'm going to tell you the link to Ukraine, okay? The link to Ukraine is there was a guy named Stefan Bandera. You're free to look him up. He was a very well-known collaborator with the National Socialists from Germany in Ukraine, and there are statues now to him that have been built by the new government in Ukraine. So that's the connection.
That's my whole point.
Yeah.
You're still following the Jewish narrative.
I don't understand what that means.
What's the Jewish narrative that you're talking about? I mean, because
there are some Zionists that actually support the regime in Ukraine, even though they have ties to National Socialists.
I want to ask him.
There's different Jewish groups. I don't know what he means.
Well, you just said it. There's Jewish groups there that are using the term Nazi.
Well, some of them
support it.
Some of the Jews in Ukraine support the regime in Kiev, even though historically they've collaborated with National Socialists.
Look. Let me address the caller. Is that
National Socialist isn't what the Ukraine is about.
Well, the new government in Western Ukraine. Well, yeah, the new government in Western Ukraine are nationalistic, or some of them call themselves National Socialists as well, and they're inspired by what happened in Germany.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. Do you have an issue with the people saying that they'd rather be for their nation
No, but they have to have elections where everybody in
There's nothing
Ukraine decides who's
nationalistic
in
about it.
power. Even the Nazi or the National Socialists took power via an election. Poroshenko's election took part. I don't know if you heard that part of the show, but when large parts of the country
Keep going back to that
were
word.
succeeding him.
Hey, I want to say
And
something here.
I'm trying to understand why you're doing that. That's why I called.
They're all internationally funded. What the government in Kiev is funded by DC.
No,
There's no.
No.
Yeah, the country's now
A
in debt to
national
Europe.
country isn't internationally funded.
Exactly. So they're not
Only
even real
by
nationalists.
choice.
They're not even real nationalists. They're funded by Europe, by banks, by the United States against their own interests of their own people.
Well, if they're their own people, they're their own people. They're not funded by Europe or America or anybody else. Their own personal government can take care of their own people. They don't need anybody else.
Well, but they already have been funded by the IMF.
They're funded by a bunch of other people. You know who's actually being nationalist and not, and actually is, making a country where they wouldn't have foreign influence, like what is going on with East Ukraine, is rejecting the imperialism of DC, the imperialism of the EU and Germany, of Angela Merkel.
Well, the Ukraine is being invaded, period, because the Jews want that country.
I'm just not going to put up with that anti-Semitism anymore. I had to hang up on him. I mean, he's free to listen in, but I'm not going to accept more calls from that guy because he keeps saying the Jewish, what is he talking about?
Well, I don't even know what he's trying to say, but it seemed like most of the time he was trying to defend West Ukraine. Like he was trying to say how they're being...
He doesn't even know they were funded internationally by the IMF. That's like known news if anybody's looked into what's happened in Ukraine. Ukraine already is in debt with the IMF. They got some funding from international bankers already.
From the Rothschilds, which if he's talking about... the
Rothschilds are Jewish as well. They're funding the fascists, and they don't care if historically they were National Socialists or Nazis. You know what I mean? It's about their game of chess against Putin and this continuation of the Cold War.
I don't know who. It's like I'm not. It's like the thing is I'm trying to figure out who that might have been, but it's like I don't
think he ever called the show before. He's probably just a random guy.
I think it might be somebody else around, on one of these radio networks. But it seemed like, it's like I can't believe somebody would actually go on here, seem like trying to defend the Nazi government in Kiev, which it's like the word Nazi, is that...
Look. The Israelis sold a missile to the very people in Western Ukraine that downed the flight that we were talking about from that report. What's the number of the flight? It was the MH-17.
MH17.
Yeah, the MH17 flight, yeah. So Israel can care less if these are the grandkids of Nazis. Or Nazi collaborators, or National Socialists, whatever. They're still doing business. The Zionists are still doing business. So when he says Jewish, there's a lot of different Jewish groups. It does sound a little anti-Semitic the way he keeps asking that question. So I didn't want to really put up with that more. That's why I disconnected. But regardless of what you think about Israel, the fact is there's Israeli arms companies that sell to anybody. They don't care. And they are involved, not directly, but it looks like Israel is involved now with that missile that downed that plane. And of course, the Western media is not talking about it because Western media is controlled by capitalists, not necessarily by Jews, but certainly by capitalists that don't want the truth to come out. They want the arms race. I mean, the arms. They want war in general, the selling of arms to continue.
I want to also point out to that guy is that it's like I don't even know what he says the Jewish narrative. It's just like I don't even know what the funny thing is that all the most I'm not going to say because the most of the Jews do not support what the most powerful there's a few the Israeli government that are Jewish, and then the Rothschilds are Jewish, but most Jewish people don't support the actions of those Jews.
We're talking about a few group of elites that are backing the fascist Western Ukraine in spite of a history of anti-Semitism there in collaboration.
But again, it's like I don't know what exactly what he exactly is by saying about it's like what narrative what would they be trying to accomplish by trying to take down West Ukraine? West Ukraine's doing everything that Israel wants.
Let's not delve on it too much. You get callers like that sometimes. Let's try to get back to the
anyways,
call in my hand. You
It's,
read
it's
the report, right? Because I've looked up the report and I couldn't find anything. Like the only thing I found was something from Russia Today. We got somebody from a different area code, so it's a different caller. Hopefully, with a question about Ukraine. Yes, you have a question about Ukraine?
Yes, sir, I do.
Go right ahead.
Sorry, I had to turn you down. Do you understand the history of the Jewish involvement all through Prussia? Any of that? Can you tell me why Ukraine? Okay, wait. Can you tell me why the president of Ukraine was a Jew now? And can you tell me why there was what do they call those, a rich billionaire who tried to actually occupy their oil ministry?
All right, let me answer your
Can
question.
you tell me why that? No, don't ask me a question. No.
Answer your question.
No, answer that question.
Yes, I'm
Answer
going
the
to answer
question
both
before
your
you
questions.
ask me a question.
No. You said if he's
Tell me
Jewish, right?
why.
I heard that. But
Why are the
I
Jewish people taking over the Ukrainian government, including their ministries? Why? Is it the same thing
The grandchildren of the Nazi
Russia?
collaborators have taken over. The people that hate Jews. And some of them are backed by Zionists.
Really?
Some
They're
of
not
them are
taking
backed by
over.
Zionists. Poroshenko,
Who is the president? Who is the prime minister? Who is the minister?
there's rumors he's a Jew, but he's not. He was born in Odessa, where there are a lot of Jewish people and a lot of ethnic Russian people. But he himself,
There's a lot of Jewish people. 10% of the population now controls 100% of the industry over there now, right? It's the same thing.
what was your first question
Same thing.
before
Stop.
Poroshenko?
Stop.
About
This
Russia?
is the same thing that happened in Russia at the same time
Okay,
with
you
all
said
these
Russia, not
great
Russia.
big people.
Okay.
Yes, I've researched that, and you should really research. These are the same people, the same Jewish oligarchs. They are now taking over the Ukrainian infrastructure.
Thanks for your input.
If you
God, he won't even let me answer a freaking question.
Al, seriously.
I'm being sarcastic by thanking him, but Jesus, that's a disconnection.
Quickly.
No, I mean, I wanted to hear a little more of what you had to say to be fair, but come on.
Well, I was going to address that guy because I
Sorry,
wanted to
Chris,
say.
it's just, you know.
Hey, can you let somebody else talk out, please? You're
All
really
right, well,
cool.
tell me what you wanted to say to him. Go ahead, we're listening.
Gosh, I'm just saying, please. You are talking over people tonight. I have to say, sorry, but I tried to tell you in the chat room, but you weren't listening. Here's what I wanted to say: is that all these type of government officials, yes, a lot of them have Jewish blood. It is true, some of them, but it doesn't have anything really to do with anything because number one, they're going about people that I'm pretty sure are not 100% fully Jewish. So it's like they call them Jews. Usually they're 250,000 and they,
Poroshenko has no Jewish blood whatsoever that I've studied. There's been rumors that he was because he's from Odessa, but
well, other government officials, not Poroshenko necessarily. Some people say he is, some people say he's not. But other. And here's the thing: it does not matter because, as we see, the Strasser brothers, who were Jewish, funded the Nazis. As we see in the past, other Jewish families like the Rothschilds funded the Nazis. It's like it actually. In Nazi Germany, there were top officials that had some Jewish blood. The thing is that again, it doesn't that there's some Jewish people they're not going to represent they're not going to actually represent what most of their people want. They just are elites. Elites of any race really are not going to represent what their people want. If they're elite Germans or elite Americans, they're not going to represent what their people want. They're part of their big club that we're not a part of. And look, this is again, really what should be looked at. Again, people seem to be not looking about the Israel to, there's an Israel connection, there's a German connection, there's a U.S. connection that's made in government. And nobody wants to. It's like out of all these people that are calling in, nobody's addressing the victims of Odessa. Nobody's addressing the people the people I know on Facebook. In the many Facebook groups I had that have lived through these atrocities. People that actually live in East Ukraine that are suffering. People that I think have actually probably lost people personally through the West Ukrainian onslaught in East Ukraine. but they won't address that. No, they're more worried about proving what their story is. That the guy, he said the same thing happened in Russia. He's going to say that the Bolsheviks were Jewish and that every Bolshevik was Jewish, which is not true. Number one. Number two is that the Bolsheviks brought a lot better country than the Tsar had. The Tsar was, putting people in pogroms, or it was just setting off pogroms against innocent people. The Tsar was, keeping a big part of the country in slavery until 1860, was serfdom. They had slavery almost as long as the United States had slavery. And also the Tsar was way extensively richer than any of the Russian people, and there was this extreme economic inequality where there's tons of people were scrapping for a few potatoes in Russia, while the Tsar and his associates ruled the country in extreme opulence. So, and then the Bolshevik, Stalin was not a Bolshevik. He was a Bolshevik, but he killed all the other Bolsheviks and took extensively all the power to himself.
Did I say something now? I'm about to get into Trotsky, actually.
Trotsky, who is, I guess it really does relate because he was from Ukraine. Trotsky.
Can I say something real quick?
Wait, you have to. Okay, yeah, say something.
No, I wanted to actually continue what you were saying. I was going to mention Trotsky. This may shock a lot of the conspiracy, Jewish conspiracy guys that may be listening in, but Chris and I are admirers of Leon Trotsky. And any person who thinks about Jewish conspiracies like the devil is Leon Trotsky. But we actually admire the guy and what he did for Russia and for Ukraine. He was born in Ukraine. And something that might shock them as well is, I'll admit it here on the air, I'm the grandson of a Jew. So if people are going to keep calling in about Jewish conspiracies and all this other crap, I'm going to have to get emotional because that's some bullshit. I have a relative who died in the Holocaust. So I'm not going to put up with that shit. But you can go ahead, Chris.
Yes, I know. It's like I don't have my knowledge is like yes, I'm not Jewish, by any percentage, but it's like when you talk about Jews in that way, when there's when I know the truth is that most Jews were opposed to the state of Israel, most rabbis around the world were opposed to the state of Israel. A lot of Jews around, they're normal people. It's like Zionists and Jews are different people. It's like it's like, so now according to these people, I don't know how far it goes, but I'm just saying when I go up to New Jersey and I'm at the Jersey Shore, I'm gonna hit on Jewish chicks. They look hot. It's like I don't care. I'm sorry. It's like I don't care what the Jewish, everything is back to the Jews conspiracy people have to say about it. But it's like I don't know how far they take this. Some of them take it with the bullshit.
Well, a lot of them hate Arabs too. Like I've heard guys that say we don't like what Israel does, but I would never want my daughter to marry a Palestinian or an Arab because they know the Palestinians are Semites too, and if they're real anti-Semites, they got to be against them as well. So a lot of the criticism of Israel from people that are anti-Semites or in the conspiracy theorist realm when it comes to Jews, which goes back all the way to the Tsar. They'll just, they'll talk about Israel, but they don't care actually about those Palestinian people either, because they see those as, dark-skinned people as well.
Well, it's like what I feel like is the same, when these people talk about, it's like, yes, okay, you admit that it is true. There are some of these government officials in West Ukraine are Jewish. However, it's like at the same time, they don't address what happened in Odessa. They don't address all these terrible massacres, and they don't really have any, feelings towards them because they just want to prove their, side of the story, these people are so stuck on, I don't even know who are the conspiracies. I think it's David Duke is the main one that, puts stuff like that, has people believe in stuff like the two callers that have called in their show so far. And it's like, why would you believe David Duke? The guy was a freaking KKK member for a long time.
Well, that actually gives him some legitimacy according to a lot of people that think like that, but he also believes we're all reptiles. I don't know.
He buys it. No, not David Icke. David Duke. Duke.
Okay, I know who David Duke is. Yeah, he was a wizard of the KKK, and he claims not to be thinking like the KKK anymore. But in his book, in his autobiography, he still thinks that the Semites, the Semitic people, are in some kind of conspiracy, and he could care less about the Palestinians when he's critical of Israel. It's more about his hate towards Semitic or Jewish people.
Well, and also I wanted to, David Duke, he actually became a congressman in the United States. That's the shocking thing about all of it in Louisiana, and that's how he got the prominent. And now,
We're talking about that. You know what happened in Louisiana recently, right? They tased the man with a heart condition. His wife, his girlfriend, told the cops he has a heart condition. Please don't tase him. So they waited to tase him until he was inside the precinct on camera. They tased him for like 10 minutes to death for wearing saggy pants, a black man. And actually, one of the officers holding him down was also black, clearly a house slave. And they were holding him down until he died and kept him in his cell for several minutes until his heart stopped. And that happened in Louisiana, the same place where, and I don't want to stereotype everybody from Louisiana. I love New Orleans. But there are segments of the population that are racist. And in spite of the governor being, from India or his family's from India, I mean, there's a lot of contradictions about him. But what's the name of that show with the hunters that's from Louisiana?
It's Duck Dynasty.
Duck Dynasty. They talk down to the black people, and actually they are for using the Bible for pedophilia, that they want girls at 14 years old to marry older men so they can't think for themselves. I mean, where are the feminists when it comes to shows like that? So yeah, I mean that's a lot of Louisiana out of part of the culture there, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's like again, again, I think feminists really cherry pick, and that's like what we talk about. Why we don't really like Alex Jones is that feminists, they do the same thing.
Well, Alex Jones is like feminists, and everything he says about feminists, I agree with. As a matter of fact, some of the guests that comes on about feminism, I've contacted them, so they come on our show. Hopefully, they can do that. But I think that Jones, unlike us, is an opportunist. He's doing it for being opportunistic, not to get to the truth as a conspiracy analyst, not a theorist like we do.
Again, it's like it's starting to really wear on me because it's like when you really start to wake up and you know all the different sources and what kind of all they have to say about things, and you see the different perspectives that people actually, not only do they just take a few bits of information, they start to become the perspective of what that person wants them. They become conditioned, to be an Alex Jones truther or a David Duke truther, but these people are not really real truthers, that actually they just both of them cherry pick, both of them take the certain examples to prove their supposed point of view. Alex Jones both of them are racist, but just racist to different races. Alex Jones, he won't talk about Jews in whatever, in any derogatory way. Even Israel, that they won't talk bad about them because he thinks that.
Well, I'm glad anybody would talk against Jews in a derogatory way. And most Zionists in the world call themselves Christians, by the way.
Yeah, but it's like I want them, but David Duke, who hates Jews, and hates the Arabs, and practically everybody is not white. He also, they both have different, different views, but it's both kind of one of it's a symptom of being a conspiracy theorist, and that's it, not a conspiracy analyst, conspiracy realist. I mean, I think we need to have a vote on this somewhere about a new term for people like me and Al, and a lot of the good hosts at UCY too. It's like it's not just us doing a good job. I mean, a lot of the hosts here do a good job too.
The host that wanted us to call in on Tuesday about climate change, I wasn't available then. Chris had a last moment thing, but we're always open for debate if they want to invite us in the future.
Well, we're doing next week. We're talking about climate change, so I'm
assuming for that, right?
Debate will happen next week. But for this week,
is Daryl calling in for that?
And also he will be Daryl Sherney, who we've had on Voice of Rebellion, not when we were on UCY. In fact, it was the last show we did at Stabled Radio before we joined UCY officially. It was back in May. We had Daryl Sherney on for a 45-minute interview. I think he might be on an hour. I don't think he's going to be on the full show, but he's going to be on next week as part of the climate change show. He is trying to he hasn't officially announced his candidacy for the Green Party, but he is a presidential candidate or potential one. So I thought it'd be interesting to have him on the show. And what I thought of I'm thinking now is that remember before the show I was thinking extensively about it, and I've been really thinking about it again lately because we had this group on Facebook, me and Al, for that we both kind of run, and it's kind of went silent recently because we haven't been doing too much on it. But the Leon Trotsky International Brigade is this idea because in the Spanish Civil War, a very similar, comparable war to what's going on in Ukraine. In the Spanish Civil War, Franco had taken over the country, and then they had the Spanish Republic. Were fighters. They were originally supposed to be backed by the Soviet Union. Of course, there was the big betrayal by Stalin, and he left the Trotskyists and anarchists that were fighting along with the Spanish Second Republic to die in Spain. And then they
died. They rounded them up and threw them in jail and killed a lot of them. They literally went after all the people that were fighting the fascists because they weren't Stalinists. And then when the Stalinists took over, it sabotaged the Spanish Civil War. And then the same year, 1939, that Franco took over all of Spain, Stalin went and had a pact with Hitler to split up Poland. So Stalin did a lot to betray the working class in Europe at that time, which helped lead up to World War II.
And, he was, and the Trotskyists
Hitler was backing Franco as well as Mussolini,
And there was Trotskyists fighting there, and they had brigades, many international volunteers. It was, it was almost like unprecedented, really, for such a collective international fight against fascists in one area. And there were American volunteers. There were all kinds of volunteers from all over the place. One of them, a famous one, was Hemingway. Hemingway, I believe, he drove an ambulance in the.
No, he drove an ambulance in Italy during World War I. In the Spanish Civil War, he was part of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which was not a Trotskyist or anarchist brigade, but the brigade that's called the POUM, which is also a political party in Spain, was founded by former Trotsky, the former secretary of Trotsky, Andres Nin. And Nin, along with other members, anarchists, etc., where George Orwell joined up as well and wrote Homage to Catalonia about. In Spain, Aragon and Catalonia, they were in the front resisting the fascists. And a lot of international brigaders, when they returned to their countries, lost their citizenship, unless they were famous writers like Hemingway or Orwell. But, a lot of the Frenchmen and Spaniards and others that have gone to Ukraine and the brigades now to fight the fascists, when they return to their countries, I wouldn't be surprised if they got their citizenship as well. It's a lot of things repeating itself now if you know the history. But one of the callers said, do we know the history? Of course you know the history. But their questions were kind of absurd,
in East Ukraine, they most rely on volunteers. They don't really have many paid soldiers, actually. Most of these people are fighting for, just the fight against fascism in West Ukraine. And, the East Ukrainians, they have some international volunteers, but there's only happens to be one American volunteer that I know of. This guy was fighting along with the Novorossiya forces. There's Spanish, there's actually, I think, some famous cases of Spanish doctors coming from Spain, which is understandable because they had similar situations 70 years ago.
I wouldn't be surprised if Cuba sends doctors to Ukraine, because they send doctors all over the world, and of course the Cubans are in solidarity with the anti-fascists or anti-imperialists in general. But the people that took over in Ukraine, it's not correct to call them nationalists or even national socialists. We could say that they were of the ideology of the Nazis, but they're not. They sold out their country to the international bankers already. You know what I mean? They're not even real nationalists. And I'm an internationalist, by the way. But they're backed by international banks to sell out their own country.
And the different kind of internationalism, I mean, just to clarify.
Yeah, I'm an internationalist who's against the banks. The people should be able to control their destiny. That's the essence of socialism, real socialism, and democracy. The people having the control, not being able to have a ulterior motive or an agenda, and then using that to betray your own country, obviously. And like I said, Poroshenko sold out his country alongside right sector and these fascist groups, and they're trying to take over Novorossiya, which are the last remnants of the anti-fascist Russian culture in Ukraine, which we fully support, and we very strongly feel about that, to the point that we're, backing people going there and fighting them. Somebody's going to come on and ask questions like that. I mean, we're so deeply involved. We actually have a caller right now. I hope we're a little friendly.
Okay.
All right, you're on the air. Go ahead.
What's going on, gentlemen? Interesting show tonight. This is Michael from Texas. How you doing?
Oh, have you called in before?
I did.
Yeah, he
I called
called
you
it
in
last
last week, guys.
Oh, thanks for calling. Yeah, we're talking about Ukraine.
Really? That's an
Yeah.
interesting topic. That's a very interesting topic.
Well, I was mentioning right now is that we're deeply involved in the Ukrainian crisis because it's a horror it's a horror show that I personally know a lot of people on Facebook that have to live in Ukraine right now while their country is being torn apart from fascists that have been funded by DC. Like what happened in my neck of the woods down in South America. Back 30 years ago during Operation Condor.
With them being funded by fascists, don't you think that the fascists are just another arm of the great big banking oligarchy? They're just like another arm, like opposite to the Bolsheviks. I mean, they're just both tools of the bankers. This is all about money. What's really the reason to go into the Ukraine? I mean, let's just look at
prevent Russia from having.
Back in the 30s, there was a reason to go into the Ukraine and do a lot of damage in the Ukraine. And a small portion of the population took advantage of that. But what's the reason now?
Well, I think that the reason right now, partially, if you look at the pipeline routes that Russia has running through there that are owned by Russia, and were during the past where they had the governments had more friendly relations with Putin, the pipelines.
Well, where do those gas pipelines run?
They run to Europe and in
Russia. Right. So you have to look at Ukraine being also a part of a larger ball of mess, because the whole war in Syria is to run a pipeline through Syria to circumvent the pipelines from Russia going into.
Well, that's a major
Europe.
economic reason for the war in Syria. There's also, of course,
right.
In Syria.
You're on the ball, gentlemen. You're both right on the ball right now. So there's a major economic reason. What does that mean? That means there's money involved. And gentlemen, we got to look at who's providing the money.
Syria, so of course they want the Syrian central bank to be controlled by them. And for all this time, ever since the '63 coup back in, it's been over 5 decades since Syria has been influenced by the West. And and during that time they've been free from the Rothschilds. They've been doing a lot of trading with Iran and other countries that doesn't have Rothschild banking.
Is the enemy the fascists? Because that's just a large.
Well, let me ask you something. Let me ask you something, Michael. Why do you think it was good to go into Ukraine in the 1930s, and who you're talking about that went into Ukraine in 1930s specifically?
I don't think it was actually good at all for the Ukrainian people that what happened to them in the 1930s. 7 million people died in the span of about 18 months. 7 million people were starved to death in about.
You're talking about Stalin, what he did to Ukraine. I get that.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Holodomor. Yeah. 7 million people dead in a year and a half. Now, when you look at that, it was Stalin. Yes, we can look at Stalin and his Georgian roots and all that. But Stalin is just one man. And yes, I understand he was the boss. But you got to look at what his party was, right? It's the basically the Bolsheviks he didn't purge, and then the up and coming Khazars.
Well, I want to say something about
the people who died. Well, let's look at something. I mean, this is like really not a debatable issue right here. The people that died in the Ukraine, the 7 million, that was primarily Christians.
Well, I want to point out something is that Stalin, yeah, he was horrible. I mean, he killed millions of people in Russia. All his political enemies. He killed. He targeted. He really targeted anybody he thought was a threat to his power. However, the only thing I don't get when people say Bolsheviks and Stalin are connected is that he killed all the Bolshevik leaders that won the Bolshevik versus White Russian War. He was the only one besides Molotov that was standing after he had done the purges of all the Bolsheviks. And in fact, he kind of demonized the old Bolshevik movement and made
he
whole
demonized the old Bolsheviks because they were a threat to him. That's all. The only reason he did that is because they were a threat to him.
I believe he poisoned Lenin. He had Trotsky killed. I mean, the guy was a betrayer of the Bolshevik Revolution.
All right, wait. You guys earlier said that you're a fan of Trotsky. I've done a little bit of research on Trotsky myself. All right, so number one, if we're going to call him Trotsky, we should also call him by his real name at some point, which is Lev Bronstein, right?
Yeah, Bronstein Milonovich.
Right. Okay. So earlier you said something about like an anti-Semitic conspiracy, like it doesn't exist or something like that. And I number one, I'd like to take issue with the word Semitic, being that it's yeah, I know it's like popular use and all that, but it's really not the correct use of the term. And then,
well, I know that actually I was thinking the same thing, is that it's really anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish are not the same thing, because a lot of Jews
the
are not even
Palestinians are Semitic as well. I said that earlier, yeah.
And a lot of Jews are not even Semitic at all, because they're Ashkenazi and they're from Europe.
Well, some of them are converts.
They've got no claim to the land in Israel. Like if we look at Netanyahu, what's his real last name? It's like Michalewski or something like that. There ain't no sand people named Michalewski. Come on, man. That comes from the hills of Poland or something.
Well, the DNA's proven they're part Middle Eastern, so they're mixed. But yeah, I mean, they came and invaded the land. That's the point. Like, they should live there as a minority, I think. But they took over land that was predominantly belonged to the Arabs. That was wrong. Yeah.
It should be Palestine. It's one Palestinian state, and that's what it was forever. Until 60 years ago when they invaded.
Maybe this is why I'm gonna have to pick an issue with you guys. Just something that you brought up yourself. You earlier said that you really can't tolerate this anti-Semitic conspiracy or anything like that. But when
there is a Zionist conspiracy,
wait up. Let me finish this, please. When the facts are brought up and you actually look at what's going on in the story and you look at who's behind it, and you follow the money all the way to the end, you always find it's a Lev Bronstein right behind it. Okay, it's not Chuck Williams out of
Yeah, he never hid the fact that he had Jewish origins. He was an atheist, but certainly, even though he called himself
listen, the atheist thing is really convenient, right? Because that whole atheist line really doesn't address the upbringing, and this is a real thing. I mean, if you look at the difference between like the upbringing of Jewish children and the upbringing of Christian children, there's a great big difference.
He went to a French school in Odessa, so he didn't go to a Jewish school. He wasn't raised religious.
He had parents, and he had a period before he went to school. He didn't just pop out of his mom and go to a school. There's a formative era before you go to a school that you determine your self-worth.
They were persecuted in Russia, the Jews, during the pogrom. So Trotsky's family went to Ukraine, and his father bought land there. So they could get away from the pogroms.
The persecuted aspect, I mean, you really got to start asking yourself, if you're kicked out of every bar that you go to, you're evicted from every apartment that you live in, and you're fired from every job. It's not your landlord, it's not the boss, and it's not the bartender that's the asshole, it's you. So at this point, like this claims of pogroms and all this kind of stuff, to me that kind of rings hollow, because shit happens to people of all colors and all creeds.
Yeah, the Armenians were persecuted as well. I don't really think that's the Armenians' fault necessarily. The Turks wanted to take over their land. Just like Palestinians are persecuted by Zionists, which is the correct word, because a lot of Jews are against Zionism. That doesn't mean that Palestinians everywhere. I mean, Palestinians in refugee camps everywhere are being discriminated against. That means only Palestinians' fault.
You probably shouldn't call them refugee camps. You probably shouldn't call them refugee camps. You should probably call them an open-air prison.
Well, yeah, Gaza is an open-air prison. Now, some of the refugee camps in Syria, for example, they lived in pretty good conditions before the Civil War. So it depends where you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, on their land, they live in prison. And when you use the term Zionist, I would agree that not all Jews are Zionists, and not all Zionists are Jews.
Yeah.
I'd almost have to say, though, without Jews, there'd be no Zionism. And
Herzl started modern Zionism. With the secular, he was secular, non-religious. Herzl, the guy who started modern Zionism, he was using the word, but he wasn't a religious authority.
We're going to get back to these claims of being secular and non-religious. They don't really jive with the upbringing that you've been given. Because, all right, I'll be honest. I was raised Catholic. Currently, I claim to be agnostic. I don't necessarily worship any invisible man in the sky. But in the end of all, I'm not ditching my Catholic upbringing and the values that were instilled to me. Now, there's different values instilled into Jewish people just by the difference in the book from the Invisible Man in the Sky.
Well, the Old Testament's in most Christian Bibles. The Old Testament is a replica of the Jewish Torah. So it has influenced Christianity
and then
Islam.
There's books beyond the Torah. There's books beyond the Torah.
Yeah, I mean, there's books on philosophy. But, you know, you can take from different cultures, and one particular culture causing its demise. I mean, if you're talking about, like, for example, ISIS, you can't even say ISIS are really Islamic, because who started ISIS? You know, the CIA and the Mossad worked together to get ISIS over there.
Right, but ISIS isn't a philosophy taught from childhood, which, you know, basically when it comes down to it, is a supremacist philosophy. All right, you're better than everybody else. Everybody else exists to serve you. It's okay for you to go out and do something wrong to them because they're less than human. They're, you know, translated as cattle.
Sure.
I personally have a problem with that.
I think any sane person thinking would be against that. I mean, you're going to dehumanize a person, you know, and use your religion to justify it. I mean, I think you can't. There's nothing lower than that. That's a bad thing. And in Ukraine, both people. And Ukraine is not religious, though. In Ukraine, both people are predominantly Orthodox Christian. The Western Ukrainians and the Eastern Ukrainians follow the same religion. So it's more of a political conflict in Ukraine. And the conflict in Israel-Palestine, yes, religion uses a lot to justify what they're doing, but essentially I think it's a political conflict as well. And there can be solutions to this. We talk about the Minsk agreement.
It's easy to say it's a political conflict when all the political players, or a good, you know, 85 to 90% of the political players are involved, are of one religious background. It's totally easy to say it's a political problem at that point. When in
most people involved in the Ukrainian conflict are Christian. So I don't know. Most of the people involved in the Ukrainian conflict, Putin is Orthodox Christian. Poroshenko says he's Orthodox Christian. So most of the people in NATO,
the people who are involved in the Ukrainian government right now.
So most people talk about calling themselves Christians. I don't blame Christians for what's going on in Ukraine. It's political groups.
Well, then we have to look at who's funding them, and how much of that funding is coming from Israel. How many of the small arms during the Maidan Square uprising were actually traced to being Israeli weapons?
I agree. The missile was bought by Israel. I mean, the West Ukrainians bought it from Israel. They're a main arms manufacturer all over the world. So you're right that Israel is involved, at least indirectly, because there was a missile that
well, guys, I hate to like go back to what
originated from Israel, but their role in the entire thing is minimal, I think. But yeah, I mean, there are some Zionists that are sympathetic for the fascists in Western Ukraine because they see them as a game of chess, not because they themselves.
But see, once again, here you go. Here you go talking about fascists like there's any difference. Why don't you talk about the Democrats or the Republicans? I mean, it's the same joke, right?
Yeah,
they're both an arm of the giant banking beast.
Yeah.
The banking beast that wants to subjugate everybody, and you're playing into their hands by like worshiping their individual body parts. I don't agree with this guy.
No, we expose the bankers all the time, but we have to call people for what they are. They themselves are calling themselves National Socialists, also known as Nazis. What they're calling themselves, their ideology.
So National Socialism isn't necessarily fascism. It was a fascist idea in Germany, but it's not always been.
Look at their rhetoric. Their rhetoric was anti-Semitic when they were first starting out. Now they're Ukraine. But
just because it's anti-Semitic doesn't
they're anti-Russian now.
Because I'll tell you, they've been kicked 109 times out of like 84 countries. That's a poor track record. So you can't just say it.
When you're a minority and you're weak, you're going to be persecuted. And unfortunately, Jews for a long time did not fight back, and they were persecuted. But there's exceptions. That's
an interesting point. That's an interesting point. I'd like for you to pursue that after I throw something at you. And I'm going to move it off the Ukraine topic for something that's a little more closer to home for all of us here. All right. You said the Jews are all they never defended themselves, and that's why they were persecuted. In the United States right now, we are in the midst of a great big fight over gun control. And the forces that yell the loudest for gun control in the United States happen to be Jewish people.
Well, I am
on top
pro-gun.
of that, a good portion of those happen to be dual citizens with Israel. Now,
yeah, I know.
You just said to me that the Jews never fought back, and
I
that's
didn't
why
say
they got
never. I was
fought.
about to give an example, and you interrupted me. I said exception like the movie Defiance. If you see the movie Defiance, you see Jews fighting Nazis in Belarus. There were exceptions, even though there was a gun ban by Hitler on all Jews in Germany, except if you were a German citizen in 1938, you could acquire guns. So if the government took the guns away from you, I'm acknowledging Hitler took the guns away from the Jews. Therefore, they couldn't defend themselves. Not because the Jews didn't want guns. In Belarus, they fought back with guns.
Okay, so what you're doing is you're acknowledging to me right now that the Jewish politicians who are in power in the United States are fully aware that somebody with a gun can fight back against some sort of...
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir saying that because we're pro-gun. We're down here in Florida. We're pro-gun just as much as in Texas. We have nothing against that. We feel people should be able to defend themselves if they're Jewish or not Jewish against an oppressor, somebody who's oppressing them.
Well, look, it's like we support gun rights 100%. We support, regular people being armed against the government so they can't dominate over us like they have in many countries before. And I see where you're getting at. Okay, yeah, there's 15 senators. Yes, it's 15%. A pretty appalling number have dual Israeli citizenship with Israeli United States.
So
and oftentimes,
why do the ones that would have benefited from having firearms and
the Jews fought back in Russia as well, by the way. Bolsheviks of Jewish origin, and they didn't keep it secret, even if they took on nicknames.
In the United States right now,
the United States
why are
is
the
a different
ones...
thing. The biggest arms manufacturers in the world are Zionists, so yeah, they want guns for the elites.
It may be a different thing, but in the end, it's people getting killed and people being subjugated. So it may be a different thing, but in the end, it's really the same thing. So why are the people who know that firearms are an effective measure against tyranny, why are they trying to take them away from people in the United States?
Well, they are part of the elite. You can't. You're talking Jewish, like as in they're all one group, but the elite are their own.
I dare wager to say that if you were to look at groups such as, let's say, Citizens for Gun Control and Mayors Against Gun Control, and these groups that are Jewish funded, basically Bloomberg funded and liberal organizations funded, and I hate using the term liberal, but that's what everybody refers to it as.
Yeah.
So these groups are funded by Jewish-backed organizations. Their membership is highly Jewish. There's not one legislator in the United States system at the national level that stands up for individual rights and gun control. The loudest voices for gun control are Jewish citizens who are fully aware that having a firearm eliminates the tyranny or gives you a way to fight back against the tyranny.
But here's the thing I'm wondering.
I think it's the opposite. They have the draft.
Are you saying that these people are, because these people, the elites, okay, the elites, if you looked at, the different families, not all of them are Jewish. There are many different religions, but that doesn't even really come to play because they're their own club. They're as George Carlin said, they're a big club that you're not in, is what the elites are.
I agree with that we're not in that club. And there's a lot of useful idiots out there screaming for it.
They don't want blacks to be able to arm themselves. A lot of the people that are diehard NRA guys, they don't want blacks to arm themselves. In California, when Reagan was governor, as soon as the Black Panthers started arming themselves, the NRA with him made legislation.
You guys kind of fall into like these stereotypes, right? Because I'd almost guess that you think that I'm an NRA guy, and I'm not.
So you have to be in the NRA to join a gun club. I'm talking hardcore guys that, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to stereotype, but there are certain elements within our NRA that are of the far right, and that they don't want to see black people with guns.
The NRA, they're of dealing with gun rights. It's like I don't even look to them when I'm talking about gun rights. It's like there's many other organizations that actually, smaller organizations that actually really support gun rights. The NRA just supports gun rights.
The NRA has practically a monopoly. I'm just talking about a certain sector of the NRA.
You just brought up the fact that maybe the NRA doesn't won't want to arm blacks or something like that, which I kind of find funny because, the NRA actually has a spokesman that's black. His name is Colon Noir, and he makes a video probably about every 3 days. He's an active shooter, and he's a black guy. So,
is he a member of the new Black Panther Party? No. I mean, he's probably similar to, Obama, only Obama's anti-gun. But you know what I mean? Somebody that they can accept that's black. But if it's obviously a militant,
it's like, let's remember that the NRA doesn't, it's not only do they not, support certain people being armed, they don't support many gun rights activists. Remember when they had the big open carry thing in your state?
That's right.
It was in California. It wasn't in Texas.
I don't trust in the NRA.
Well, actually, there was an offshoot of in Texas. I think it was in Houston of the Black Panthers that walk around with guns. Yeah.
Right.
Recently.
Right.
What I'm saying is that the NRA has always been the best.
I'm completely glad those Black Panthers in Houston are armed. And I'll tell you why. An armed society is a polite society. There will only be 1 or 2 incidences where people being a jackass before everybody realizes that guy's got a gun, that guy's got a gun, grandma's got a gun.
Well, that's respect instilled by fear. It'd be better to have respect out of love for somebody. Yeah, somebody has a right to defend
himself. But that ain't happening. Gentlemen, that ain't happening.
Not in the current society.
Respect out of love, that's pie in the sky. The reality is that people cross the street because a young urban youth in a hoodie with his hands in his pocket walks to him. And it's not because it's racism, it's because that's what perpetrates the crime.
A hoodie perpetrates crime.
I'm sorry? I said that right now black youth perpetrate a great amount of violent crime.
And why is that? A lot of them are out of work. And why are they out of work? I mean, we can have a whole debate about that, but it goes a little too off topic. But thank you for your contributions. If you wanted to ask him something else, Chris, before we change the course here.
Well,
I'll tell you what. I'll let you guys get back to what you're saying. I appreciate you giving me some time. You're still welcome to come on my show anytime you like. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry about that on Tuesday. Something came up for both of us.
I didn't realize that was you because we had a couple callers, I believe, from Texas. But yeah, we would like to call into your program. Maybe talk about climate change or other issues. Just keep in touch. Write Chris on Skype. I believe you wrote him on Skype, and we'll keep in touch with you.
All right. I'll get a hold of you guys. All right. You guys have a good evening.
All right. Bye now.
You too. Well, we got off topic with Ukraine, and it's kind of it is a little bit annoying to get that far off topic when because it's like this show. Ukraine itself I could talk about for multiple shows, and the fact that I've already been cut down 30 minutes, getting off topic and stuff. I wanted to go back to is that I think we were about to talk about there needs to be more American volunteers. There needs to be more people that need to realize that the fight again fascism. Why do we call these people fascists and not just bank agents or some other term? Is because the bankers are fascists themselves. They believe in the ultimate corporate state power.
Yeah.
They believe Mussolini's fascist definition by heart, and that's what they want for the whole world. So and that's what they want to do in Ukraine. And Ukraine is vital, like that he was getting at, because of the pipeline that goes from Russia that Russia owns and their gas that goes to Europe that they want to get rid of. And the West Ukrainians want to be in control of the pipeline. Just like in Syria, it's not the main reason, but it is one of the reasons because the Israel to Central Asia pipeline that's being built, that they want to build.
Chris, I wouldn't want to debate you on Ukraine if we were in disagreement, which we're clearly not on Ukraine, because you're very passionate about it as well. And I'm passionate about a lot of issues. I got emotion there a little bit because look, you got to be fair in your analysis. And he was saying I was stereotyping him. Hell, he was stereotyping in a lot of his terminology. I was talking about a sector of NRA. Because just to be in a gun club in Florida, you have to be a member of the NRA. So obviously I'm not talking about every member of the NRA. There are certain sectors of them that do not want to see black people with guns. Now, this gentleman that called in earlier, and I'd like to go on the show and ask him about it, he said, that he doesn't mind Black Panthers walking around with guns, which is fine. But then he kind of contradicted himself because he said, well, who perpetuates crime is black youth. Now, we can look at the statistics of that, but the question is, rather than just deny it, why does that happen? There's a lot of unemployment. And let's take it back to Ukraine. Right now, Ukraine has huge debts with the IMF ever since these so-called nationalists took over. And that's going to result in a lot of unemployment there, in Greece and other countries, and that's helping the rise of fascism because of the Treaty of Versailles. Germany had to pay war reparations. That helped brought the rise of fascism in Germany because their economy was suffering and they were being punished. And that could happen in Ukraine. That's a very dangerous scenario. Not just a question of those in the government now that could be fascist or fascist affiliates, but the young people they could recruit that don't have work as a result of that poverty. That's something that has to be looked at as well.
Well, it's what I wanted to point out. Is that what we're talking? Is again, it's like we're talking about West Ukraine and the East Ukrainian conflict. Is like, yes, it's like this government it's already taking a toll on the West Ukrainian citizens, and they're pretty angry actually. That they're pretty angry that their pensions have been cut significantly, and that a lot of economic benefits that they had prior are being lost, and also, there's
people's pensions are caught in any culture. They're suicides. It happened in Spain. It happened in the United States. It could happen in Ukraine. I mean, you're not talking about angry people. The people that literally thrown themselves off balconies when they had their pension cut and when they were kicked out of their home. That's the desperation we're talking about. And when the Palestinians were desperate at one point, they brought suicide bombers. Desperation brings desperate acts that only makes matters worse, and these things should be prevented.
And look, the West Ukrainians right now, these people in West Ukraine, they're war criminals. They're fascists. They're again doing crimes that parallel, the kind of crimes that were being done in Nazi Germany, and the amounts that are being killed in East Ukraine. It really needs to be brought to the attention of the American citizens. The American citizens need, there needs to be more American volunteers that are willing to go and fight with Novorossiya and other brigades and forces in the Novorossiya area that the fight against fascism. And it's like I think that a big American, stance against their own government, the fight in this war against the fascists that our government funded will be significant. It'd be a huge thing, and that's what we've been trying to accomplish with that Leon Trotsky International Brigade. And I don't care. I'll talk about it on the radio. I'll talk about it on Facebook. It's like I know that being part of the group and being one of the main organizers of the group has brought me under local law enforcement's eye.
Roman was set up for underage drinking. I believe he's 20 now, and he was in jail for a few months. He was at that point working. He lost his job as a result of this. Our old co-host Roman, back when we were on Blog Talk Radio, he was saving up money to travel to fight in Ukraine, and they put a stop to it. They set him up. I mean, activists that are preparing for that, they need to be very careful to not get themselves in trouble.
Well, it's the same thing that happened to me. It looked like they were trying to, they were just waiting for me to slip up because, like I said, I'm not really that paranoid of a person. But it's like I noticed it was just too significant to ignore. The days after that I joined the group and started at the beginning, I was pretty active on the group as an admin. I'm still an admin, I'm just not as active anymore because the activity in the group's kind of died down. But I wanted to start up again.
Hey Chris, what's the number to the show? You want to put it out there real quick?
718-717-8296. But let me continue. Is that in the first days after this happened, I noticed police presence all around my neighborhood, and it seemed like they were just waiting. They probably were hoping. They're probably going to get me on something stupid like they got Roman. They're probably hoping I'd do something stupid like start smoking a blunt down the street or something. And I don't know what the police really thought I was going to do, that they could actually catch me illegal, because I don't do illegal stuff, that they could arrest me on. At least not if I was to do it, I'd be sneaky about it. But I guess they're hope that Roman, I mean, he was literally in his own apartment, and he's 20 years old, and he gets caught for underage drinking. Then they put a hindering obstruction charge on there, and he had originally a sentence of 3 months. He's allowed after 1 month out of jail early. However, did screw up his situation with work, and that's probably what they
I believe he's on probation now, too, so there's restrictions. He can't leave the city, let alone the country. Right.
You can't leave the county when you're on probation. So it's really hard. It's pretty hard to find work when you think about it. Well, he did find work, but when you can't leave the county, and he lives in a pretty rural area, there's not many jobs in his county. So he can't, on probation, you can't leave the county, and they're constantly checking on you. And then if you break probation, which they're really hoping probably for him to do, then you get in serious trouble. And so again, they really did screw our co-host up. They really set him up for. Just to put him in jail and screw up his plans to go to Ukraine, and They don't want American volunteers to go over there because it makes.
Yeah, there's only one that we know about that did an interview on Russia Today with his face covered, so we don't know his identity.
Well, yeah, look.
The reason they take away his citizenship for fighting fascists because those are the U.S. allies, which is bullshit. I mean, there's U.S. citizens that have come back to this country after fighting with ISIS in Syria. They don't have their citizenship taken away, but apparently fighting fascists is worse.
Well, again, ISIS is the United States government proxy as well. So, they're fighting Assad, so they find that as actually doing the U.S. government's work, so they allow them to come back with their citizenship intact. But this guy will not be able to come back as a citizen because he's lost his citizenship.
Roman was born in Russia, so he has double citizenship, I believe.
Well, yeah, Roman, I mean, it'd be a little bit of a different story since he was actually born in Russia and he was adopted by an American family to the United States when he was 6 years old. So he spent the first 6 years in Russia. But this guy was a pure American, the one that went to went to East Ukraine.
Yeah, he had no accent whatsoever in that interview.
It was 100% American, and when he went to the fight, he lost his citizenship.
Well, I don't know if he did, but I assume he would when he returns. If they find out who he is, they might do voice recognition.
He probably certainly did because I'm pretty sure that East Ukraine is those fighters in East Ukraine. These people rebelling against fascism, according to the West Ukraine, they label them as terrorists, and probably their allies. They probably expect their allies, the United States, to label them the same way. I mean, a lot of people that are not even terroristic at all, are labeled as terrorists by the United States.
Look at how Turkey's involved here, Chris. Putin recently gave a very strong condemnation against Erdogan in Turkey for his support of ISIS. I mean, it's literally the only country with an ISIS consulate. I don't want to get off topic, but from Turkey, people head north as well through the Black Sea to fight in Ukraine. So Turkey's kind of playing both sides. They let the anti-fascists go in through Turkey to get to Ukraine, but at the same time, they let in the anti-Kurd or the ISIS people into Syria on their southern border. So Turkey's trying to play both sides in this thing, but they're pissing the Russians off.
Turkey's not even playing both sides. They're acting like they're playing both sides, but really they're playing one side. They barely done anything against ISIS. They're fighting the PKK only. And also another thing, a little backstory about the PKK. Despite being a very strong anti-ISIS force in northern Syria or western Kurdistan, no matter how you see it, I mean, the thing is actually, despite the independent political differences between Assad and the Kurds, they right now have taken alliances with each other against the Syrian rebels, or aka Syrian terrorists, and ISIS. So the PKK is a giant anti-ISIS force, and this is the same. These people are socialist. They have women fighting actually in their ranks.
They're for the independence of Kurdistan, which the Turkish government considers an attack on their sovereignty, and they've been at war with the Turkish government for a long time. So you think the Turkish government would back off now? Instead of taking advantage of fighting ISIS, they themselves go after ISIS. Instead, they're going beyond U.S. orders. Probably U.S. orders will say, okay, stop supporting ISIS now, they're out of control. But Turkey's going on and continuing that, while at the same time pretending to fight ISIS. They might have to shut down the ISIS consulate. Far like I said, the ISIS consulate in Turkey is still there.
It hasn't been removed because ISIS merchandise actually that's sold in Ankara. It's a true story, and so it seems to be clear what side Turkey's on. I mean, and it's not only just them in the Arab countries that are funding ISIS. I mean, Bahrain, Qatar, many of the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. I mean, it's really all the United States allies in the region are also funding ISIS, along with the United States. Of course, Israel's funding ISIS, has trained ISIS and kept them in their hospitals. So it's we've talked about, in some ways it's kind of a similar situation, but then again, it's, in Ukraine, the opposition to the government, are the ones that are, really the rebels in that situation, the ones that are actually, fighting for freedom. In Syria, it's opposite. The supposed rebels are fighting for a future Sharia law, U.S. puppet state. I mean, if you want to see what the future of Syria would be like if the rebels and ISIS actually succeed in Syria and taking out Assad and the Syrian government actually collapses, look at Saudi Arabia. That's what they're trying to make Syria. They're just trying to make them into another Saudi Arabia type country. And also, another thing about Turkey I want to point out is that Turkey is that they are doing the Zionist agenda, whether they claim to or not. They claim to be anti-Zionist. However, they're one of Israel's top 10 trading partners in the world. So it's just like how Qatar, says similar statements, and they pretend to be pro-Palestinian when it's convenient. Really, they trade a ton with the Israelis, or like there's a few examples really, where even Saudi Arabia at times, tries to play a little bit of the pro-Palestinian card, even though they've never done anything in the last 40 years to help the Palestinians. And what they've done has been Israel's closest ally in the Arab world, and their second closest ally in the world, next to the United States, who they have a ton of influence in.
By the way, in a couple of weeks is the anniversary, the 75th anniversary of the assassination of Leon Trotsky. And, he was born in Kherson outside of Odessa. He was a Ukrainian Jew that was second only to Lenin. What he accomplished, founding the Red Army, everything else that he did for the Soviet Union. I mean, he even came up with the hammer and sickle, the sign of the Soviet flag, which was deformed by Stalin. But I think it's fitting to mention Trotsky when you talk about Ukraine, because a lot of people don't, or they're uncomfortable talking about it. But no, I think that we should admit that we admire this man, and the reason why we do is for everything that he did. When fascism was coming up and everybody was underestimating it, Trotsky was fighting it. He wrote a book about it that I sent to Chris. I believe it's called "Fascism: What It Is, How to Fight It." So yeah, he was a great man. He was killed by Stalin because Stalin killed off most of the original Bolsheviks, as we mentioned earlier.
Well, yeah, Stalin killed off all the original Bolsheviks besides himself and Molotov were the only two that were standing at the end of it. And Stalin, he pretty much had alienated all the old Bolsheviks and even have eliminated them from photographs and done many propaganda tactics.
The inventor of Photoshop was Stalin, taking Trotsky's image away when he was posing by Lenin, right?
He was the first. Yeah, he did. I mean, he was one of the first to doctor images like he did, and he did that with a lot of the leaders. And just I mean, it was like how Orwell, which probably he based that tactic in 1984. I remember, getting killed wasn't the worst fate that could happen in 1984. You could get banished, meaning that you were not only killed, but all traces of you were eliminated from textbooks or any, eliminated from the internet or in anything that was printed in 1984. And also, if you were...
You're talking about the book 1984 that George Orwell wrote, not the year.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. And also in 1984, the book, they, if you mentioned one of these people that were vanished, you get in trouble by the stop police or whatever. It was kind of like that was kind of what Orwell was somewhat of a Trotskyist, so he did not like Stalin, and so the thing
Stalin literally persecuted Orwell, and he had to escape Spain because of it. Every person that was a member of the POUM at that time was persecuted by Stalin. It wasn't a question of them leaving them on their own to fight the fascists. They literally rounded everyone they could find up and threw them in jail, and many of them were tortured and killed.
Well, and also supposedly the supposed enemy, supposedly the enemy to the 1984 Orwellian government that's in the book was a guy named Emmanuel Goldstein, is the character, which is supposed to be loosely based off of Leon Trotsky. I
have to read that book again, yeah.
So, and the thing is, like, Stalin at times had used, or Stalinists to this day, used, anti-Jewish, stereotypes and stuff to discredit Trotsky. Is how in 1984, if you read the book, the government uses the same kind of tactics to discredit Goldstein. It's the kind of there's a lot of things about 1984. People think that it has no real world connection. They think it's just a what if scenario, but it's actually based off of many things that have already happened, were to happen, and did happen, or could happen down the road in the future from now. in the Western world, UK, United States. A lot of Orwell's predictions in that book came true. I know Orwell's a little bit off topic of what the original topic was, but we are talking about...
No, Orwell is on topic. He was an anti-fascist. He also warned of the danger of fascism and went to Spain and fought them, which is a similar situation to Ukraine. So I think it's fitting we talk about Orwell. Maybe Trotsky's a little more relevant because he was actually from Ukraine, but certainly Orwell's not completely off topic.
Well, yeah, and another thing I wanted to mention, in the show is that with the East Ukrainians, actually, though, it's like unlike what the West Ukrainian government or a lot of people say. A lot of people underestimate the power of these people, but they've actually had a pretty successful military campaign. A lot of territories are being taken over by the East Ukrainian forces. So it's not a losing battle. It's not a lost cause like some people would think. So I really think that, again, if there were more volunteers from the Western world, especially the United States, there's these anti-fascists in the military, these people that claim to be against tyranny, that like the Oath Keepers and other sects of the military that are against the tyranny of our own government. They think they may go to Ukraine and then fight something that was created by our own government, a tyranny in Ukraine. It seems like volunteers from the United States would be, the push that they need to finally push through and put Ukraine or West Ukraine at a position where they would have to at least negotiate the creation of an East Ukrainian state and officially make the Novorossiya forces goal actually completed. But I think Novorossiya...
There's a difference between the current situation, American public opinion about Ukraine, and American public opinion about Germany prior to the United States intervention in World War II. If Japan did not attack Pearl Harbor, then Germany would not have declared war on the United States out of alliance with Japan. And because when Germany declared war on the United States, that changed everything. Before that, there was plenty of anti-Semitism and sympathy for Nazis in the United States. There was plenty. So there was a lot of resistance in the United States to join the war, or if we did, it'd be alongside Germany against Russia. So, that's why the United States was neutral for like 2 or 3 years into the war, because 1939, it wasn't until early 1942 when the United States really sending in troops. Like, I think it was September 1939, right after Poland got split up, that Germany attacked France and then Britain got in. So it wasn't until a couple of years later. So a lot of people don't realize that. To go to Harvard, for example, up until the 1950s, if you were Jewish, you were turned away. That's how MIT started. All the Jews that are turned away from Harvard, they went down to MIT. Chomsky talks about that. Chomsky was one of the first Jews to graduate from Harvard. Of course, now he teaches at MIT. But now how American public views what's going on in Ukraine is that deny fascism exists there at all. That's the extent of our propaganda system. But they don't even realize that there's fascism going on in Ukraine. At least the EU propaganda system can't go that far because their own governments were condemning these same groups, So these groups are changing rhetoric, but they're the same ideology, Are you there, Chris? You sound a little bit scratchy.
Well, the West Ukrainian, I want to mention, the West Ukraine, propaganda that they use, constantly. It's like, I know, changing sub a little bit, or we're changing. Yeah,
revisionist history. This is Stefan Bandera didn't help the Nazis. Excuse me.
Mention the one thing that they use a lot. Talks about the Russian invasion or Russian support, but again, is that it is all complete baloney, and that I've seen some of them are complete jokes. The satellite photos that they say of Russians supposedly crossing into West Ukraine. They
would know if they were. They would crush Kiev in 2 minutes. So that's not happening.
Yeah, the West Ukrainians, I don't know if they pretend like they could actually have a standing chance against the Russian army, but I don't think that I don't even think the United States Army could beat the Russian army. I think the Russian army is literally the most supreme military force on the planet. According to military,
Russia has a larger population than the United States. So does China. So by ground forces, they have more numbers at least. But we're talking about a World War III scenario here. We don't want it to get to that.
Well, yeah, but I'm just saying, in a conventional war, most military analysts, I just want to exemplify the strengths that the Russian army has, is that a lot of military analysts believe that the Russian military in a conventional war stands alone. There's no
Russia has several nuclear weapons as well, not just the United States. The United States has a monopoly on nuclear arms in outer space, though.
Well, yeah, the United States. I mean, a nuclear war. It's not. There's no such thing as a winner in a nuclear war. I mean, nuclear war. Everybody loses, so it's not even
a sticks and stones in the next one, as Einstein would say.
Yeah, if there's even people around to throw sticks and stones, that should be added into that. I mean, they talk about, I got 35. This country has 35,000 nukes. This country has 25,000 nukes. But if all the nukes are used, literally there would be not a single survivor on the planet if they,
that's enough to blow up the entire planet several times over.
Yeah, it's funny. It's the fact is that Israel has a giant nuclear stockpile similar to what you would think that the United States would have or something. They have enough nukes to blow up. Some people say half to the entire world.
I heard that between 200 and 300 nuclear warheads. But the United States has tens of thousands of nuclear warheads, so you can't really compare. It's a small nation. But certainly they're the only nation in the Middle East with nuclear capability. Pakistan is not in the Middle East. It's in Central Asia. So in the Middle East, it's the only nation with nuclear weapons is Israel.
Well, and also another thing about, the Pakistan wouldn't have nuclear weapons, if the United States had both Israel and the United States, or Israel and Pakistan's nuclear weapons programs were aided by the United States. Israel's nuclear weapons program was at first absolutely opposed by JFK, but we all know what happened to JFK. And then Lyndon B. Johnson supported the nuclear weapons program from then on out for Israel. Pakistan.
The United States wanted India and Pakistan nuclear weapons because they wanted to maintain the divisions there. And India said the reason why they were getting theirs was because of the Chinese threat, who had nuclear weapons already. But I think the main reason was, because they wanted to have superiority over Pakistan. Then later Pakistan got nukes as well.
Well, Pakistan got nukes directly from the United States government.
Ukraine gave up all its nukes when the Soviet Union fell in exchange for U.S. support. So that's another reason why Putin doesn't go in there, because he knows the United States gave that promise since the Soviet Union fell that they would back up Ukraine.
Well, in West Ukraine, the West Ukraine forces, they don't really even have their weapons are outdated. Most of the stuff is actually from the Soviet Union. Ironically, that's the funny thing is that if Russia was to invade West Ukraine, it would be 2 minutes it would take for them to get to Kiev, and any resistance, it'd be weapons that they trained with 25 years ago that they've fixed up, upgraded, and got new weapons compared to the ones that they have. I mean, this is all stuff from the 1980s. You mean AK-47s versus what Russia has nowadays. They don't even use the AK-47 that much anymore, from what I understand.
We got about 20 minutes left. 20 minutes left. If anybody wants to call in, it's 718-717-8296. That's 718-717-8296. Go ahead, Chris.
We had I've been kind of surprised by especially because the first two callers were, starting to go down. It's like we shouldn't. The word anti-Semite shouldn't be used towards when you're talking about people that are anti-Jewish. We should be said anti-Jewish.
Well, it's accepted terminology, and later on you can clarify that Palestinians are also Semites. Therefore, many anti-Semites are also against Arabs, or just using the Arab cause to go after Jews. But I think it's still the terminology you can use, and if people want clarification, they can get it. But people that believe in conspiracy of the Jews, that they control everything, they typically are anti-Semitic, correct?
Well, these people, again, I don't. It's like I really don't. It's like here's the thing that doesn't make sense about these. People that believe Jews control everything. So to what extreme? These people have all kinds of extremes that they go through. There's some people that just believe that. It's like Jews are in control of all the world's governments or most of the world's governments, but it's like not all Jews are bad. Then there's some people that think that all Jews conspire together and that that every Jew is biologically evil. I mean, there's some people that
false.
Yeah, it's like, but it's like again, the elite are the elite. They don't really even have a religion. They have the religion of money.
Exactly.
That's it. It's like the Zionists don't. It's like Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, pointed out perfectly when he's talking about the Zionists. They were asking, it's like, why do you hate Jews so much? Or kind of going down that line. I think it was he actually was interviewed by Larry King, and he was like, I don't hate Jews. You think that me not liking Israel means I hate Jews? That's not true. Israelis are not even Jewish. They're they don't really even have a
religion. There's 30,000 Jews that live in Tehran, and they refuse Zionist bribes to leave the country to go to Israel. So there are several Jews in Iran that are treated as equals. I even heard Ahmadinejad's families were Jews he converted to Islam. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't think Ahmadinejad was anti-Semitic. He definitely was an anti-Zionist, and that's a controversial view when you're openly anti-Zionist. But to say that he hated Jews is unfair. I mean, there was even anti-Zionist rabbis from New York that came to visit Ahmadinejad and hugged and kissed him, on the cheek. So it's very obvious he would have never gone through such a, an encounter had he hated Jewish people.
Well, again, it's like the same people that say that. Again, it's kind of weird how it went down in the United States with the propaganda machine. Is that they always have to say that that the leaders of the other countries that they don't like, the ones that are anti-Zionist, the ones that are anti-New World Order, they always say that they're bigoted of some sort. They say that Iran, they said Ahmadinejad was anti-Semitic. They said for Gaddafi the same exact thing because he was so strongly anti-Zionist. They tried to say he was anti-Semitic, or they even tried to go because of his Amazonian guard. They tried to say that he was misogynistic and he's using these female slaves to guard him or whatever. They went on down that way. With the Amazonian guard, they would always criticize Gaddafi. They would make it seem like he was using women. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. It's like they always go down the same route, that these anti-New World Order leaders are all bigoted. That's what they try to say about these people, or that was Chavez. They try to say that he was a few things. They try to say that he was anti-Semitic because again he was strongly anti-Zionist. Or
I think that there was a mistake that Gaddafi made, and I don't think it was bad intention. Practically every country in North Africa was doing that at this time. So in one of the wars that Israel was doing, I think it was the 1970s, it was fighting Egypt and Syria. Several Arab nations, including North African nations like Libya, kicked out all their Jewish citizens, which Iran never did, by the way, and that was very smart on Iran's part. But in Iraq and in Libya and Egypt and those countries, they kicked out all the Jews when those wars were going on, which I think is stupid. Just because having Jews doesn't mean they're a secret Israeli agent. Now, that has happened, where Israel have used Arab Jews to spy on other nations.
They did in Iran.
They shouldn't justify to kick out all the citizens. I think Gaddafi, from his perspective, he was young at the time, he was doing it out of solidarity with his other nations, kicking out the Libyan citizens that were Jewish. It was out of an anti-Semitic motivation.
Well, it's also out of extreme fear. I mean, it's like when you really, because it happened in Iran. It's happened before where, it's like in Iran, they had, most of them of the Jews in Iran are loyal to the Iranian government, don't have any beef with Ahmadinejad or now Rouhani or the Ayatollahs. But there was a couple that Israel had put, they let some of these Iranian Jews go back to Israel, and some of them came back, and they were paid off by the Mossad, to cause havoc inside.
Yeah, but as a result, did they kick out 25,000 Jews from Tehran? No. But in other countries, they kicked out tens of thousands of Jews, unfortunately.
I'm just saying that it's out of fear. I could see.
It's stupid. It's giving the Zionists more recruits, because where are they going to go? Tel Aviv, probably. So they should have never done that. They should have just had a good counter-espionage, found out who the Jews were, deport them or jail them. Don't even deport them, jail them. Why deport them and let them go off to Tel Aviv and be recruited over there? But, that's just my opinion. I wasn't in the Middle East at the time. I'm not old enough to have been alive at that time.
Yeah. Fear that they probably were going through at the time, so you probably can't really comment. But
right. I'm just giving my opinion in hindsight. I'm being fair in saying that these guys were not guided by Nasser and Gaddafi at that time. Were not guided by motivations of anti-Semitism, but out of just fear that those citizens of Jewish descent could spy on them. And there is still a lot of Arab Jewish culture, not in Israel, in Europe, and other nations that they had gone to, that's still there, fortunately. But what's interesting also, if you look at World War II, Rommel, when he controlled as the German army, head of the German army in North Africa, when he had a lot of Jewish subjects under his control, and he didn't go after any of them because he wasn't anti-Semitic, and they were more focused on going after European Jews. And in the end, Rommel was part of a plot to go after Hitler, and it was towards the end of the war when Germany was losing. But you know, the Nazis, ironically, Jews that were darker skinned from the Arab countries, they could care less about. They were more focusing going after mostly the European Jews. So.
You know what's, you brought back the Nazis. You know what's funny is that it's like I just remembered something that happened. There is the, like we were saying, is that the Allies. It's kind of weird. Is that in World War II, it's like Stalin had at one point a pact with Hitler. The United States only jumped in because of Pearl Harbor, and Britain at one time was kind of pro-Nazi in the late 30s.
Even the Royals. Yeah.
And in fact. The Nazi there was a plot inside the German army, top German army officials. It was called the Oster conspiracy. Oster was a top German army official, and he was planning a coup against Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, the movie Valkyrie is based on that. Yeah,
he was against in 1939 or actually 38 because of, and he was gonna.
Okay, that's a plot that that wasn't the one with Rommel. The one with Rommel was in the 40s. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I was going to mention is this one. The Britain, all they had to do was give their support, the green light, to the German, because they had what they needed was they needed they needed something from them. I forget exactly what but I know the plot. Pretty much the plan was that they were going to incarcerate Adolf Hitler, declare him insane for what he had done to the Sudetenland and doing the sudden annexation of the land, and that Oster and his group of men would take over the government. But because Britain didn't give the green light, Oster backed out because he was afraid it would not succeed. And then Adolf Hitler remained in power and found out about the plot and threw Oster in jail, and I think he was eventually executed for conspiring. So Britain was also culpable towards the Nazis continuing. It's like, again, if they people talk about Trotsky badly. If Trotsky was around, Adolf Hitler might have came to power, but he wouldn't have gone far in World War II. In fact, I think that he would have never. There would have been no pact for the Germans to feel safe to try to invade and catch the Russians off guard.
You get in a time machine sometimes,
because there would have been no invasion of Russia. The Germans would have never invaded Russia.
What you're saying reminds me of an encounter between Hitler and the French ambassador at that time. And Hitler told the French ambassador, "I could march into Moscow easily." And then the ambassador said, "What about Trotsky?" And then Hitler went hysterical because Trotsky was still alive at that time. And I don't remember the year that Russia and Hitler, Russia and Germany were fighting each other. I think it was after Trotsky died. But Trotsky was alive during the Hitler-Stalin pact. He was able to criticize that. So even during the pact, Hitler was so arrogant that he could tell the French ambassador, "Yeah, we could end that pact and march into Moscow." But as soon as the ambassador mentioned Trotsky, Hitler went hysterical because he knew that Trotsky was a real revolutionary. That he would have definitely defended Russia, and instead Stalin left Russia very vulnerable. They were even losing the Finnish war with Finland next door, and that encouraged the Germans to invade eastern Poland and then go into Moscow, and they almost took over. Going to Russia, they almost took over Moscow.
We got about 10 minutes left of the show. If anybody wants to make a last call towards the show and get some final thoughts in there, please keep it on topic about Ukraine. 718-717-8296. That is 717-8296. And I was thinking, again, it's like I'm just going to share out the Facebook group out there in case anybody's interested in joining. I'm the admin. I'm one of the admins. Al's another admin. Unless you look to be something really suspicious, where it's like there's a good reason for me not to add you into the group. Usually, I allow most people in until they screw up, and there's been a couple screw ups. So please don't screw up once you come in the group because I'll be pretty pissed off. But it's called the Leon Trotsky International Brigade.
And Trotsky is Trotsky.
It's on Facebook. Just look it up, and you can. It's an open group, I believe, so you can just join. actually, it's a closed group. You can join. I have to add you, but it's not secret or anything. I have to add you first. You can look it up and try to join yourself.
Let me say something about the guy who called in earlier real quick. Lenin's real name was Vladimir Ilyich. And Lenin was part Jewish himself, but just because Trotsky called himself Trotsky, which actually was one of the names of the jailer because he had a dark sense of humor, doesn't mean he was trying to cover up the fact that he was Jewish. He was very well known. His brother-in-law, who was also Bolshevik, Kamenev, was a Jew. So there was different revolutionaries that changed their name not to cover anything up, but that was very common among revolutionaries. We're getting a caller for the last few minutes of the show. You're on the air.
Yeah, just to express gratitude for the high level of research and discussion, research that's gone into this discussion, and reading this obvious study that all the speakers have, irrespective of whether one agrees with the spin that everybody has. It's really good. It's really good to hear that people are delving into this history and trying to reverse engineer it from all the lies we've been told.
Yeah, there is a lot of revisionist history going on. Go ahead if you have a question.
Well, the thing about the Ukraine is, I guess I'm going to run, a lot of us, I suppose, are picking up on the standard textbook Webster Tarpley interpretation that it was the Germans that essentially invented the Ukraine at the end of World War I, and before that it was called Ruthenia, and the idea that it was a sort of artificial construct to begin with in order to keep Russia, to have a buffer state against the Russians, and that this was a strategic idea of the German general staff. And, I don't know if there's any, like I say, that's got its own sort of spin on it, but,
Well, the Austro-Hungarian Empire existed before World War I, and yeah, from there, they were reaching out to Ukraine, trying to make it a Slavic union. But go ahead, Chris.
Well, Ukraine always has had a culture of itself going back prior to World War I. Yes, at one point it was the territory of the Germans, I think as part of the German Empire of Prussia. However, the Ukrainians, they are Slavic people. They are really, in a way, more closer to, there are a lot of ethnic Russians that live in Ukraine these days. They're really more genetically closer to Russian people as they belong to Slavic and not Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, part of Yugoslavia was in Austro-Hungary as well, so that was Slavic areas.
Yes, and I think that the idea, that might be actually a little bit tainting to some people's minds of the idea that that's closer to Germany, because again that does go along with kind of EU propaganda about Ukraine. They want to make it seem like Ukraine belongs to Europe. It does not belong to themselves like it should, or that they should be more closely aligned with Russia. That they've always had a mutual friendly relationship during all really of Russia's periods of history. During the Russian Empire, during the Soviet Union, and then they had this brief. Now they're having this brief impasse, but still there's those East Ukrainian fighters. They're trying to make their own country.
Yeah, the Novorossiya fighters. Yeah.
The Bolsheviks had promised Ukraine an independent republic, but then I guess Stalin kind of reneged on that in the end. The popular cultural, like people like me, maybe our image of Ukraine, like maybe when we were growing up, we saw the movie Taras Bulba, with Yul Brynner, and I always very much think of Ukraine as the land of the Cossacks. And but who were in the steppes? These guys on horseback, basically they ride horses and they're out there on the steppes, and it's kind of a rough life. And
the Tatars lived in Ukraine as well. I mean, at least in the Crimea, because as of the 50s, the Crimea became part of Ukraine. We had Tatar people and Cossacks and all types of people, and the Cossacks defended the Tsar for a while. Then they changed sides during the Bolshevik Revolution. But yeah, I'm sure a lot of them had origins in Ukraine as well.
Well, the funny thing about the Cossacks is that they're actually, they're also kind of connected to Russia as well. I mean, the Cossacks were, these horsemen that would go around the borders of Russia. They were kind of like the defenders of, the borders of the Russian Empire back all the way up till, the Russian Civil War. And then, they chose to fight along with the white Russians during the Civil War. Now you see, again, like a modern, they call themselves the Don Cossacks Brigade in Ukraine, and nowadays they're fighting against the fascist they're fighting alongside with the Novorossiya forces in small numbers. So it's actually kind of cool that they've actually kind of made a comeback, and it's like this historical group. And again, it seems like these people in East Ukraine actually have a stronger connection to the true Ukrainian culture than the West Ukrainians, made up fiction of a European culture that's being pushed there. So
well, even Russia technically is European, or at least part of it is. So yeah, part of Ukraine is Russia. I mean, is European. But does that mean they have to join the EU? Look at the disaster of the EU. Look what's going on in Greece right now.
I think European. I'm not talking about Europe as a whole or European people, but what I mean is that now the European Union, what really it should be, the
Eurozone.
The Euro culture should be called. What Merkel and what the United States want of a European culture nowadays, and it's being degenerated by this whole modern wave. A lot of the old European culture is being lost, and now you see like stuff like it's kind of a common complaint among. So
this is our first caller who's been very friendly with us, because we had a couple hostiles when the show was first starting, talking about Jewish conspiracies or whatever. I don't know how long he's been listening to the program. Where are you calling in from, friend?
Oh, did you want to comment on Khazaria also? I know I'm going to touch off a storm by even bringing that, but whether...
Yeah, the Khazars were from Turkey. Some of them, I heard, converted to Judaism. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah. I mean, Arthur Kessler published this book, The 13th Tribe, back in the 50s. It really started this whole thing. But I don't know that anyone's really... We know that this empire existed, and we know that some of the elite, some of the royalty apparently practiced Judaism. But beyond that, I don't know that... And from that, some people have extrapolated to say that most of your Ashkenazi Jews are descendants of these Khazars. But I don't know that that's been... You know what I'm saying? To me, it's narrative.
Shows that Ashkenazim Jews, and my grandfather was an Ashkenazim, that they are 50% Middle Eastern, and that most of the Ashkenazim are like second cousins. Like the Sephardim Jews tend to be more like darker skinned Jews, but they also prove the connection to the Middle East, even with Ashkenazim Jews. So yeah, they might be part Khazar because technically Turkey's not in the Middle East, but they also show roots in the area of what was considered Palestine and all that. So it's probably a mix.
If you're talking the Levant and the Mediterranean, you're talking about a mix of peoples, and you can't really. What you really find, at least from what I've read, is that they say the closest genotype or phenotype they can get is maybe to sort of a Turkic. In other words, they're saying that when they test European Jews, typically they come up with something that's a little more Turkic than, say, Semitic. And that's a different, you know what I'm saying? That's more...
Yeah, but also a lot of them are Semitic. I mean, if you look, there's been cases in Israel where, for example, there was a Palestinian who was trying to pass off as a Jew and was successful in doing that, and then later he was accused of rape in the courts or whatever. But a lot of them look alike, and they take advantage of that and try to pass off as a different identity. And of course, there's Arab Jews that have always lived there, or Sephardic Jews. But even among the Ashkenazim, besides the Turkic, there's some Middle Eastern connection there. But yeah, I mean, it's not really related to Ukraine. But yeah, I mean, at the time there was a lot of Jews in Ukraine. Unfortunately, a lot of them were killed or went into exile. A lot of them had gone to Ukraine from exiling themselves from Russia proper during the pogroms, including Trotsky's family, who was a revolutionary we talked about earlier. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of history in those regions.
Trotsky was not really to call Trotsky was like a cosmopolitan, a rootless cosmopolitan. You couldn't really, he himself would have called himself an internationalist.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, he had no national loyalty, no loyalty to any nation. And in point of fact, when you look at that particular population, the Jews of, say, the region of Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, that whole area there, which passed back and forth between the Polish Empire and then the Russians, and then maybe parts of it were part of the old Ottoman Empire. These people would have a very weak sense of national identity, but maybe a very strong sense of, say, tribal and family loyalty.
And that could be a positive thing,
I'm sorry, Al, but we're at 10:58. Where this show's literally going to cut off in about probably 20 seconds. So
Call back in next Sunday if you like. Thanks for
Going
calling.
and no return, and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little, when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights, when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple. Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds him. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now